Shalom, Gemar Tov. I hope that your fast is going well and your Yom Kippur is meaningful. Before I begin my comments today, I want to just reflect on this last Yom Kippur that I am with you as your rabbi on what an incredible privilege it has been to be the rabbi here. Thank God we have many months together still and a lot of work to do to help bring this fantastic community to the next phase, exciting phase of its existence. But I just wanted to take this moment to say from my family to yours, along with Hannah and my boys and my mom and my sisters, who you have also embraced, and even Ethel, our little terrier, that this community is just beautiful and powerful, and to have been able to work with you, learn with you, pray with you, and to have watched the ways in which you've helped raise my boys. Hannah and I are just incredibly grateful for this beautiful spiritual community. And from the bottom of our hearts, we wanted to wish you a Gemar Tov and a renewing new year. So I wanted to begin with that, and wanted to reflect today a little bit on the core theme, really, of the Chagim, the core theme of Yom Kippurim, of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur asks us to think about what kind of person we have become over the last year. And I want us to really reflect deeply on the nature of that question, because I think that the question contains infinite possibilities for us if we think about it in the right way. I've shared with you before that the Kotzker Rebbe has a very, very powerful reflection on the Akedah which we read on Rosh Hashanah, the story of the binding of Isaac. Now, as we know, this very, very difficult story is so central to our story and so central to the life of Abraham and to the life of Isaac. And it is, of course, the story of when God says that Abraham should take his child up to Mount Moriah and to offer him there, to make an offering. And the question is whether Avraham, the question as we normally understand it, whether Avraham has the ability and the faith to follow through on this. Now, as I've shared with some people, in fact, Frida and I were just talking a couple of weeks ago about this, that Abraham may know that he will not actually be asked to offer his child, because he says to his servants, "We will return," before he goes up to the mountain. But traditionally, of course, this is understood to be a test of Abraham's total faithfulness and his preparedness to let go of everything, every aspect of himself, that in order to serve God, the implicit message of the Torah story seems to be, we need to hold on to nothing around us and be prepared at every moment to serve God in the fullest way. And of course, the story only makes sense, though we usually focus on the difficult aspect of what God asks of Abraham, that the story only makes sense when we focus on ultimately what it is about, is that service to God is never in tension with the ethical. That service to God is life-giving and life-affirming and full of possibilities. And when we see God as central and we do not fill our lives up with our own attachments, then we can serve God, and then we can fully connect and relate to others in our lives. That the story of the Akedah finally is, in spite of the challenges of living in the face of loss and understanding that everything around us is ultimately something that we have to be prepared to let go of, because we don't get to determine what will last in our lives and what won't, that to live with faith in God is to live in the face of that reality, that we have to ultimately let go of those things most dear to us and continue to serve God. That is, continue to face the world with that knowledge, with a full heart and a desire to heal the world. I think that that's a way to understand the Akedah. But the Kotzker Rebbe has a shocking understanding of this moment, however you understand this test of faith. He says something very surprising with regard to the Akedah that I think can help bring us into a deeper understanding of Yom Kippur. And he says with regard to the moment when God says to Abraham, Abraham, stop, don't lay a hand on the boy, and there's that moment at the climax of the story, the core part of the story, where God says to him, unbind Isaac and do not offer him. The Kotzker Rebbe says that moment when God changes the directive to Abraham, says the Kotzker, that moment was more difficult in Abraham's life than taking his son up initially. So just think about that. It rubs us the wrong way. It seems impossible to believe. How could it be that this moment, when Abraham's son is saved and Abraham is no longer being asked to go through with this terrible trial, this unthinkable trial, this impossible ask of God, how could it be that was more difficult to Abraham than the initial test when God first told him to take his son up and to offer him? What could the Kotzker be getting at? And as with many teachings of the Kotzker Rebbe, it's very terse, and we don't get an explanation. But the Kotzker just asserts that this was a far more difficult trial. So I don't presume to get into the mind of the Kotzker Rebbe, but I want us to use this moment to think about something very, very profound, and to return to the question that I said Yom Kippur asks us to reflect on, which is, what kind of person have I become? As we describe to ourselves the identity of who we are, as I answer the question, who am I, or what kind of person am I, very often in answering that, what we're really doing is we're shutting off all kinds of possibilities of what kind of person am I not. We're describing, when I say what kind of person am I, I'm telling you the various paths that I have not taken. What have I not decided to do with my life? What kind of frameworks have I not given myself to think about who I am? For example, I'm not an artist. I have not become a musician, just to take two minor examples. And when we answer the question of who we are, we need to be finely attuned to the possibilities that we're shutting out about who we have not become. And I relate to the Kotzker's teaching about this moment in the life of Abraham in this way. That Abraham believed, when he had established a brit with God and he was told to go up on this harrowing journey that had to be the greatest religious challenge of his life, when he was told to confront the greatest loss in his life, and to stand naked in that moment as a spiritual being in the presence of God, he faced the ultimate challenge, and he would rightly have attached his identity. I am a person in service of God. This will be the summation of my life and its ultimate meaning, this impossible test of who I am. And that was who he thought he was, and that was what he was dedicated to do, this horrible, unimaginable ask of God, that Abraham would be the person to fulfill it. And then, just like that, Abraham understood himself to be a different kind of person, and he was able to respond to a different kind of call, and his heart remained wide open to whatever it was that God demanded of the moment. And Abraham's greatness was his ability to remain open to being defined not by who he thought he had to become, but by what God demanded. That is, what we might say, what the moment demanded of him. And Abraham, in this telling, if I'm correct about the legitimacy of this reading of the Akedah, Abraham, in this telling, his greatness is his existential openness to all of the possibilities that lay before him, and not being concretely determined to follow a particular image of who he was, but to remain open to the vast possibilities of who he might be. So he is not the Abraham who offered his child to God. He is the Abraham who turned away from that and remained open to God's call, and then lived out his life with his child with him as well. So I hope you see what I'm getting at, that Abraham's greatness was in the vast openness of his heart and his ability to change his identity and to change the core aspects of what he thought his life was about when the moment demanded. The Kabbalah tells us that when the universe was created, all of us were initially all just one. Everything was one. We were one with God. There was no you, there was no me, there was no up, there was no down. And when God began to create the world, God breathed into the universe the capacity for discernment and distinction and multiplicity. And that's where there emerged the possibility that there would be a you and there would be a me, there would be a good and there would be a bad. And that each of us comes into this world with an understanding that we live in a world of multiplicity, and an understanding that we live in a world where I am I and you are you, and humanity is humanity and God is God, or at least that's how it appears to us. In our younger years, our identities are quite plastic. As I watch my beautiful boys grow up, and in one moment there are these incredibly loving, tender, sweet, innocent little guys, and in the next moment they're monsters running through the house and getting out all of their boyness and climbing through the mud and jumping on walls. And I'm aware, as I watch them grow, that all of the possibilities are arrayed before them for what paths they take in life, what possibilities they take in life. And I love these little gorgeous gems, and I know that they'll take the path that they need to take, and they'll take a good path. As we get older, we make decisions about what kind of person am I? And we attach ourselves to stories and narratives about who we've become, and therefore about who we must be. And we decide what options are closed to us and where we cannot go with our identities because we've already chosen who we are. And I want to challenge that and to say that to make those choices concrete and to say, this is just the kind of person I am. This is simply what I've done, or I couldn't do such a thing, or I don't have the courage for that, or I'm not interested in this. That what that is accepting the world of creation as it is. And precisely the task of the Jew is to challenge the world of creation as it is, and to alternate, to change it, and to alternate it, and to rectify it so it can become the world that it needs to be. Well, for the world to become the world that it needs to be, we have to accept the sometimes frightening possibilities for our own lives of what we may have to become. And my prayer for all of us on this Yom Kippur is that we can get to the level of teshuvah where we do not see ourselves as tied to particular identities that are concrete and that go all the way down, so to speak, that is, that are immovable. But that we understand that the notion that our identities are solid and immovable and immutable, and that we are fully defined by choices we've made in the past, that is actually an illusion. That if we get past all of the stories that we tell about who we are, if we peel back all of the layers that we've put one on top of the other over the years, that I am whether it's a story about our profession, that I am a rabbi, or it's a story about what our interests are. I'm interested in reading and I'm interested in teaching. Or if we put aside stories about, well, I'm not such a courageous person, or I'm not an activist type, and we begin to peel back all of those layers, we see that those are layers that we have put on. Those are not layers that God has put on. God simply put our soul into our bodies, and then with our bodies and our minds, we make choices. And the possibility of Yom Kippur is and of Rosh Hashanah is total teshuvah. And total teshuvah at its highest level and at its mystical meaning means a return to the source of life that is beyond every identity that we may have chosen. To stand in the light of teshuvah, to stand in the light of God's radiant and renewing creation, is to be willing to let go of those identities that we grasp onto out of such fear, and to welcome the possibilities of becoming that are implicit in teshuvah. Because if God is constantly breathing new life into us and God is constantly reshaping creation, and we refer to God in our prayers as Uvorei et hakol, God who creates all things, not who created all things, but who creates. God is actively working in creation at every moment, renewing its possibilities. And if we stand in that, and if we can get past the terror of letting go of our own assumptions about who we are, then we find perhaps the greatest redemption and the greatest form of liberation. Now, on the one hand, this may sound like a very, very different idea of Yom Kippur than you've thought about before. But in fact, it's not, because if we have thought classically about Yom Kippur as the season during which we let go of mistakes and try to rectify them, and we say, well, I did this terrible thing earlier this year, and now I'm going to apologize for that. When we look at the work of the rabbis with regard to Yom Kippur and Teshuvah, we know that it's not simply about saying I'm sorry for an act that we did. It's about becoming a different kind of person. The Rambam teaches us, Maimonides teaches us, that the test of whether we've affected Teshuvah is whether, if we were to stand in the exact same situation that we were when we first committed the transgression, if we've now become the kind of person who would not have committed the transgression. So it's not just going through the mechanics of apologies and making amends. It's about transforming who we are and choosing a different identity for ourselves, though we don't usually think of it in those terms. And so I want to offer to you that profound depth of Yom Kippur that I think is really there already in our machzor. Are we willing to answer the call to God, not the first call of the Akedah that we use to determine who we are with our lives, but the second call when we face the possibility of becoming someone new? Will we have the courage to do that? It requires a lot of us. It requires daring, it requires a full heart, and it requires the sometimes deeply challenging prospect of understanding that we contain powers and possibilities within ourselves that we never imagined. And sometimes we're, I think, afraid to tap into our own capacity and our own strengths and courage and our own potentials for fear of that they might demand that we walk a path that we never thought we would and that we're not comfortable walking. This is a time in the Jewish world, and this is a time in our community, and this is a time in our country when each of us is going to be called upon to summon incredible courage and bravery and to stand up for values and things we believe in, and to really walk with full open hearts to help heal a deeply fractured world that needs courageous people and needs people to rise up to acts that they never thought they would be called upon to rise up to. And I want to offer all of us the challenge that is both personal, psychological, spiritual, professional, and political, to realize that to stand in the world at each moment is to make a decision that is full of possibilities that go in almost every direction of who we are going to become. Finally, I want to reflect that during the regular cycle of the annual Torah reading right now, we are just on the precipice of reading about Moses' death. Just this past Shabbos, we read Parshat Ha'azinu, in which once again Moses' pending death is brought into stark relief by God, who tells him to go up to Mount Nebo and to look over the land of Israel where he will not arrive at. He will not be able to cross the Yarden, the Jordan, and join his people and fulfill his life's purpose, but he will die on the other side of the Jordan, east of the Jordan, and the Israelites will go into the land without him. And I want us to reflect, as you've heard me joke before, the Chazan and I have kind of a running joke about whether Yom Kippur has at its core a meditation on death. I think that mortality is an important theme on Yom Kippur, and the Chazan, being the beautiful mystic that he is, says there's no such thing as death, so how could it be about mortality? Well, I want to suggest that we read about this phase of Moses' life as we come into Yom HaKippurim, because mortality is a blessing in the sense that it offers a boundary to our lives, and gives us a chizuk to make the most out of every day as we confront in our liturgy of Yom Kippur in the Machzor, as we're encouraged to think about the fact that we do not get to be the author of our days. We do not get to determine the broad outlines of our days, that we live our life within certain boundaries that are chosen by the Holy One, as we say on Yom Kippur it is written, and on Rosh Hashanah it is written, on Yom Kippur it is sealed who will live and who will die. If we remember that stunning part of our Machzor that we read every year, we understand that in fact our lives do take place within boundaries, but within those boundaries we are the authors of our destiny. We are the ones who take responsibility for our choices. And as we look over the River Jordan into the land of Israel of our lives, understanding that we will never quite get to see the fulfillment of everything that we've attached ourselves to and that we've tried to make our lives about, we remember on Yom Kippur that whatever it is that we choose to become, whatever direction we embrace with our life, whatever new possibility and identity we grasp onto, that our task is to attach ourselves to something much greater than our own self-definition. Our task is to attach ourselves to something that will outlive us and outlast us, which is precisely the beauty of this moment in the life of the children of Israel as Moses dies and they understand that they are to become something new. They will have to define themselves anew without Moshe as their leader. They'll have to define themselves not as those who simply do what Moshe instructs them to do, but as people who are tasked with creating a holy society. And Moses has to define himself not as the leader and not as the greatest prophet, but as the person who made a stunning contribution and an eternal contribution to something that was far beyond him. And that Moses contributed his life to a cause that was far beyond him because he understood that finally his life was not about his identity and who he was. It was about making something greater of his life and contributing to the original source of life, to the source of all things, and contributing to the unity of all things. That is, after all, what he did. Moshe taught us that our lives are not about who we are, but our lives are about serving God and serving some ultimate purpose that lives far beyond us. So I want to pray for all of us that we have the strength in doing Teshuvah this year to attach ourselves to something greater than who we are. And in order to do that, we have to understand that we have to sometimes challenge decisions that we've made about who we are and what we must be and what we imagine our destiny is, and actually open up the possibilities of our heart, the possibilities that God has implanted within us in attaching ourselves to the original source of who we are, which depends not on decisions that we've made, but on the possibilities that God implanted within every human being, within which is implanted B'Tselem Elohim, the divine image. So may we all have the courage in the year 5781 to open ourselves to possibilities that we never imagined, and to be courageous in selecting pathways that might lead where we didn't think we would go, and to realizing that God has implanted within us all kinds of skills and potential futures that we haven't seen before. May we, as we confront the boundaries of the past year and look to the horizon of the new emerging year, may we draw out of this every divine blessing, take the stand on this side of the river Yarden, always looking beyond it, looking to the land of Israel. May this be a year of healing, a year of courage, a year of possibility, and a year in which we attach ourselves to the Holy One, to the light of the possibilities of unifying and bringing our world together. Shana Tova.